Hello, everyone. If you're watching this, we're here to talk about effective thesis statements and organization for your final research paper. So let's jump in. If you've ever had to write a thesis statement before, you might wonder how you know it's a good thesis statement or if you're just stating your topic. This is a question that I get from students a lot, especially in the early stages of writing a thesis statement. It's very relatable, right? What is a thesis statement and how is it different from a topic or a research question? As you go through this presentation with me, you can pull up that handout, the thesis statement handout, and fill out these questions as you go if you like. It'll enhance your learning and the process of moving through this presentation. Okay, so if you want to pause, go ahead and jot down some answers to these questions and then move forward with us when you're ready. Okay. So when we think about a topic for a research paper, you're really thinking very, very broadly. That's like the most broad base of the paper and what it's going to be about. From there, you can kind of narrow it down to a specific question. So a topic might be like food in general, right? And then a research question about it would move towards what kinds of food should we eat to avoid diabetes or something, right? And that's moving towards something more specific. Now you're looking at diabetes and food and habits regarding that, right? So you can see how it becomes more narrow. And at the top, we'd have our thesis statement. The thesis statement is really meant to answer your research question. So once you've done your research, you have this tentative answer at this point, and that will be revised and eventually become your arguable thesis statement. Okay, so right now we're going to go over more in depth what a thesis statement is. We're going to identify and practice some thesis statements. I have a revised thesis statement to go over with you to make it stronger, and then we'll finish out with some organizational tips to help you along with creating an outline. Okay, so for this paper, there's really 4 rules of thesis statements that we're going to look at. The first one is that your thesis statement must be debatable. It has to be able to be disagreed with. This is important because it moves your paper from an informative paper about something into a point that you are arguing or making. So let's say your paper is about diabetes, right? We'll go with the same example. You might have a lot of information about it, and you want to move now towards making a point about it. So is your point that there needs to be more community awareness? Is your point that doctors need to take a different approach? Is your point that the individuals themselves need to take responsibility and change their habits? Is your point that we need to change food options in schools? What are you getting at here, right? Even if a lot of your paper is focused on giving information to your reader, there has to be a component of like, what is the point or what are we moving towards, right? This should be able to be disagreed with. That's how you know that it's a good debatable thesis statement. So you might say you should change the options in school, and I think that's not the solution at all, right? The solution is something else based on my research. So, you know, you can argue for something nuanced where you say like it should be changed in school somewhat and also this, but you should be able to be disagreed with. Somebody could reasonably say, I have a different opinion on that. Whatever it is, okay? The second thing that your thesis needs to do is it has to be supportable. So it can be supported by evidence and analysis. You all have reliable sources at this point. So this isn't Joe Schmo's blog arguing that donuts are UFOs, right? This is an arguable, supported thesis statement. You have evidence and analysis to put your thesis statement on. It stands on that, right? The evidence are the sort of the legs of the thesis. You know you have evidence to back it up, okay? So that makes it supportable or supported. It should be focused and specific. So in other words, you should be able to argue this convincingly within a 4 to 5 page paper. So if you are writing a book, that's not what you want to do for this particular paper. You want it to be arguable within the scope or the page range of which we are working, okay? So if you need to get more specific, sometimes that's better because a broad topic like diabetes is going to be really hard to cover in just 4 to 5 pages, even though that might sound long to some of you. Okay, Last but not least, your thesis statement has to be significant. This means it has to answer the question, so what, or hold importance for the reader. So it can't just be about something that you're interested in for the sake of being interested in it, but you have to convince us that it's important. So I'm reading this, tell me why I should care about it. Tell me why it's important. And this goes hand in hand with that debatable, right? So what is the point here, right? What are you getting at? Why do I need to read about this? You tell me, now you've done the research on it. Why is this important? So what? Why should we care, right? That's what you want to tell your reader. Thesis statement does not have to be just one sentence, can be a couple of sentences, but I would say aim for 1 to 2 here, okay? And you're basically going to hit on a couple of these. So let me show you how we might do that. All right, so we have our pyramid here again. I'm going to walk you through an example. Let's say my topic that I came up with for this research paper is social media, okay? So that's what I'm researching. I've narrowed that topic down to a specific research question, which is, how have social media influencers changed the landscape of advertising? And what effect is this having on American teens in the 21st century? So this was my question that I started with. And now I'm going to move towards that thesis statement based on the research I found. Okay, so my first attempt at my thesis statement is on the right here. If you notice on the left, I have my research question. How have social media influencers changed the landscape of advertising? And what effect is this having on American teens in the 21st century? Underneath, I've put the criteria so that I know I can check if it's debatable, supported, focused and specific, and significant. And on the right, I've written my first attempt. Social media influencers have changed the landscape of advertising and had a huge effect on American teens in the 21st century. Okay, it might be debatable here, but really what I've done is just rephrased the research question, okay? So I haven't yet shown something focused and specific, like what impact have they had, right? What is the effect? I haven't yet previewed how I might support that, and I don't yet know why I should care as a reader of this statement, okay? So a lot of first drafts of these statements look like this, where they end up just rephrasing the question as the answer, okay? We want to move beyond that. This is a great start. If yours looks like this, you're on the right track, but let's revise, okay? So let's try a second draft here. Same topic, same research question. Now I've written, social media influencers of the 21st century have changed the landscape of advertising. This has primarily impacted American teens by making them more susceptible to ads, less aware of what is being sold, and more likely to want to emulate a lifestyle. Okay, how am I doing here? Better, right? Okay, I have more specifics here about what I'm going to cover in my paper. I know that it's going to be about American teens being more susceptible to ads, less aware of what is being sold, more likely to want to emulate a lifestyle, right? So this thesis is better, but it still doesn't say how the influencers are necessarily doing this, okay? Or why I should necessarily care about this specifically. So if you have ever been around a toddler, you know that they ask, but why? I have 2 little kids, both of them ask me this all the time. So if you are writing and revising your thesis statement, one helpful thing to ask yourself as you go through it is, but why? Okay. So how have influencers changed the landscape and impacted teens? Okay, they've changed the landscape. What does that mean? Like, what did they do? And then how they've impacted them. I have that here somewhat, right? But I could be more specific as to the significance of it as well, maybe. Like, why does this matter, right? And I can be more specific about the ways in which they're going about this change, okay? So better, but not quite there. Let's try it again. Here's my third thesis statement. Social media influencers of the 21st century have changed the landscape of advertising by targeting American teens. Okay, now I know how, right? This has negatively impacted teens who are susceptible to this kind of advertising, making them less satisfied with their lives and more likely to suffer from depression and self-harming behaviors. Okay, now I have all the elements that I need, right? It's debatable because I'm saying they're targeting American teens. There might be some people who say they're not just targeting teens, I'm also arguing that it mostly negatively impacts them. Okay, so some would say, oh, it's not all, this isn't like a huge overall negative impact. You could argue something else. It's able to be supported because I'm being specific here. Okay, so these kind of go hand in hand here. I'm saying they're susceptible. All right, it's making them less satisfied with their lives, more likely to suffer from depression and self-harming behaviors. So really specific things that I'm able to support here. And I know why I should care. I care about teens suffering from depression and self-harming behaviors, right? If the average person reads this, they're going to think, oh my goodness, that's terrible. Like, we should do something about that, right? That's what you want your reader to think. Not that you all have to have a topic that somebody says, that's terrible, we should do something, but something along those lines of like why they should care about reading about this topic. Okay, so all of our initial whys here are answered, and those are the three components that I have here in color. So they've changed the landscape of advertising. How or why? Oh, by targeting American teens. This has negatively impacted teens. How or why? Well, it makes them susceptible to advertising. Oh, well, why does that matter? What's the impact of that? Well, it makes them less satisfied with their lives and more likely to suffer from depression and self-harming behaviors. Okay, so that questioning toddler that we're channeling here is getting their answer to all these questions. Do you see that? And I've done it in just 2 sentences here. You don't have to use like the 3-pronged list if you're used to that with a thesis statement, like first I'm going to do this, then this, then this. Don't have to use that as long as you're covering broadly the things that you'll talk about in this paper, okay? So this kind of thesis statement that covers everything on our list here can also serve as a preview for the organization of the paper or how you might want to organize your outline. So let me show you how that might make sense. How can a thesis statement help organization? If you see here, this is the same thesis statement we just had on the previous slide, but I'm going to work with it now to help with an outline. All right. You see that there's the trees here. This can be a really helpful analogy for thinking about the forest as your paper as a whole, or the thesis statement, which we know is our umbrella, right? It's our overview of our paper. And so that's like sort of the zoomed out, like what are we talking about as a whole in 1 to 2 sentences? The whole forest view is the thesis statement, okay? And then the specific trees or specific sections of the forest are specific components that I need to cover in my paper, okay? So if I read through this thesis statement, the first thing I see that I need is evidence that social media influencers have changed advertising. I'm just reading through it, right? They've changed advertising. So I need to first show that before I even show that they're targeting teens, right? How have they changed advertising? Then I can show that they're targeting teens and teens are susceptible. Those kind of go hand in hand, right? So first I do that, then I do that. And then I can show that American teens are not satisfied with their lives and are suffering from mental disorders because of these things, okay? So they kind of have a natural order here that they have to happen in my paper. If I start with depression and self-harming behaviors, I haven't yet proven that social media influencers have changed the landscape and are targeting teens. And that's important to cover that first so that I can show later on the impact of it, okay? So you can kind of work through your thesis here and sketch out, what is the order that makes the most sense. Also, the other thing that you want to do is make sure that you go back and answer your research question with your thesis. So if you have your research question, like how have social media influencers changed the landscape of advertising and what effect is this having on American teens in the 21st century? Components of your thesis should start to answer this, right? How have they changed it? Well, they've changed it by targeting teens, and teens are now susceptible. So that is the effect, okay? The effect is they're susceptible and they're not satisfied with their lives and are suffering mental disorders. Okay, so I know that I'm answering my own question. Now, revision is key here. So if you're working on your thesis and you're thinking, well, I think my question changed a little bit because I found different things than I expected to, that's okay, okay? If your question changes, if your thesis changes based on the evidence you find, that's a good thing. It means you're responding to the research that's out there and you're adjusting accordingly, all right? Somebody who's blindly moving forward and just saying like, this is my question. I think that the answer is this, and I'm not going to change it until I find the research that supports this and what I already think. They're not learning anything, okay? They're just already looking to prove their point that they already decided about. You don't want that, okay? You want to be open to actually learning something. That's why we started with a question. So your question should lead you down a path where you find an answer. And maybe that means you adjust your question. And maybe that means you adjust your thesis based on what you find. That's a good thing. It means you're actually learning something. Okay. The cycle of writing, as a reminder, starts with our research question. And then we go and we gather evidence from our sources. Then we draft our thesis statement and we start to write the paper. In doing so, in this whole process, revision is key. So you're never like just stopping where you are and moving on to the next thing in a linear manner. I know that it seems that way sometimes, and especially if you haven't had to revise that much, it can seem that way. But in general, you want to be responding to what you're finding and learning as you go and adjusting accordingly. Okay, so don't be afraid to revise. When you revise for this paper, you don't have to go back and rewrite an annotated bibliography if you've already turned that in. Okay, you can move forward, but if you're worried about a source, you can check it with me, that kind of thing. And certainly don't make adjustments that you don't need to. But if you need to make an adjustment, now is the time to adjust your thesis statement, that kind of thing as you go. Okay. When you go to write that outline, as you break down your thesis and see the different components of your paper, you want to make sure that you have that evidence to back up your claims, okay? So if my claim is that social media influencers are targeting teens, this cannot stand on its own. Like myself, I can't just put that out there and say it's true. You see this a lot on social media and on other sources sometimes where somebody just says it to death and then it feels like it's going to be true. It's not good research. You need to have sources to back it up. So you might have a source that talks about, how social media influencers are targeting a certain group of teens, how they target those teens through visuals or ads, and then, how they make them want their lifestyle, right? So you might have a few sources supporting this particular claim. Make sure you have at least one source, okay? In every claim, in every paragraph that you have, you need that evidence to show that what you're saying is true, okay? As a reminder, as you go to organize your paper and do your outline, you want to revisit that thesis throughout it. You're proving a different part of it in each paragraph of your paper, all right? And make sure that you revisit it, reword it at the end. Okay, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I look forward to seeing your work online. Take care.